Hi, welcome back to Do Fix Differently. Today I want to talk about your logs and the fact that your logs are actually a gold mine of information for your firm. Now you might be thinking, well, yes, Chris, I know that. We use logs all the time. But I probably think that you and I have a slightly different understanding of why logs are important, and I want to go through that in this video. So why might people say that logs are important to them? Today, logs are actually everywhere. They're very easily accessible. We come across firms who, whenever they've got any sort of question about the way that their API works, they go straight to logs. They're easily accessible. There's loads of them all over the place. What they prefer to do is they prefer to go to the logs instead of going to things like their documentation or config files. Why? Because their documentation might be a little bit stale perhaps, or perhaps because the config files are scattered all over the system. It's much easier and more convenient just to go straight to the logs. So people tend to see logs as a very good thing. They want to try to store them and make them accessible as much as they can. And we've come across many firms who have had recent projects or perhaps projects that they started a few years ago where they're loading up all of their log files into something like Elasticsearch or Splunk or something else like that. So that's why most people think that logs are valuable to them. But here's the challenge question I would have for you is, what do you do with all of those logs? When you actually have these things in Elasticsearch or Splunk, what are you doing with them? And the answer typically tends to be, well, not very much, actually. When we have a new release, maybe we'll pick them back up again and we'll try to do some sort of regression testing with them. But you ask them, well, are you actually mining that for new pieces of information, new understanding about the way that your system behaves or the way that your customers behave? And the answer typically is no, we don't get to that part. You know, the focus is really just on storage. So we've got them if we want to. And for me, that's the difference. That's the difference in perspective between how most people view their logs and how I would view logs. So before I started this company, I was a product manager, and product managers tend to think about how can I keep improving this product? How can I keep iterating it and making it more attractive to the people who are using it right today, or correct issues and make it more attractive for people who perhaps aren't using it as much as I intended today. The key thing in any good product manager's toolkit is data. You need data to actually get that feedback and help you iterate. Okay, and that's why I think logs are really valuable. They aren't an excuse for having poor quality specs. Right? They shouldn't be that crutch. You should sort out your specs full stop. That's a theme that we've come back to again and again in this series. They are, however, a good way of improving your specs. And improving your specs means enriching it and validating that your specs are actually correct. So what are the main things that I think logs are valuable for? And it really comes down to three different things. The first one is continually verifying that your specs are accurate. Talk in a little minute about the way that I consider there to be some sort of learning mode against logs. But if you are constantly pushing your spec against log files and identifying areas in which your spec is perhaps wrong, or you're getting a conflicting answer out of that comparison work, then that indicates that there might be something wrong in your specs, and it gives you an indication that something needs to be fixed. Okay, so continually verifying that your specs are accurate, that's a great use of log files. The second one is to continually enrich your specs. So we think at FixSpec that actually the easiest way of people completing their specs is by taking real life examples and embedding those inside of your documentation. So that might mean looking at a log file, picking out a particularly good logon message perhaps, and saying, great, that's a good example. I'm going to put that into my specs to make it available for everybody else to use. Or perhaps you find some workflows inside of your log file. New order comes in, there's a pending acknowledge, an acknowledge, perhaps a partial fill, perhaps a cancel after that, okay? That workflow, identifying those in your logs and then picking that up wholesale and drop it into your specification, you can quickly see why that becomes really interesting and valuable to your reader. Having real life examples, particularly workflow examples, is a great way of them understanding your API and coding faster, and that's what we're all about, okay? So that's number two, continually enriching your specification using examples and workflow data which comes from logs. And the third one is a theme that I keep coming back to in this series, all about understanding customer capabilities. So your log file should really be helping you to identify what is it that customers are actually using in your API, either on a macro level, who's using this algo versus the other algo, or an individual customer. So, you know, this customer started using this order type, now they've stopped using it. Well, might be something that we need to have a conversation with them about to understand why they stopped using it. Is there something else we can do to get them to come back and use it a bit more frequently again? Okay, so those are the three things that I think you can really do. Continually verifying your specifications to make sure that they're accurate, continually enriching them with examples and workflows, and the third one is discovering customer capabilities. Now, all logs aren't actually equal, and there are three different types of logs, and you should consider thinking about using different types of logs for different purposes. Okay, so production logs. What use of production logs in terms of those three goals that I said before? Well, they are great at telling you exactly which pieces of functionality people use. Everybody always has these expectation that they're going to have some query on Elasticsearch or Splunk that tells them the order types and the frequency with which certain people use order types or algos, something like that. That's business analysis out of your logs. That's a classic use of raw data for production management purposes. So production logs are great for that. They're also great for understanding exactly what your customers use in real life, which is subtly different from what they might have conformed to be able to do, but what they're actually using in real life. Again, it's a management reporting angle. And the third one is about validating your spec. So if your production logs really don't match against the specification you're handing out, that's a big red flag. You need to go and fix that because it indicates that there's going to be a problem with the next person who's coming on board. UAT logs are a little bit different. So UAT logs are traditionally used in customer onboarding. Of course, they're a great way of understanding the customer capabilities. So a customer, as they're going through their development and onboarding against your API, will demonstrate the things that they are capable of doing. That intelligence should come out of your UAT logs and be recorded somewhere such that the next time you need to bring them on board, perhaps you need to upgrade them, or perhaps you need to do some regression testing, you have that information available to you and you know exactly what it is that they need to be tested on. QA logs, third type of log. The type of QA logs that you can, things that you can do with QA logs are understanding the regression impact on customers. Understanding the way that your documentation perhaps needs to change if there's a change in the behavior. So it's a great place to capture those examples, put it into your documentation ready to go, and then give it out to customers in a UAT environment and out into production as well. Okay, so production's all about understanding which functionality people use at a macro level or an individual customer level. It's about validating your spec. UAT is about understanding customer capabilities. QA logs are all about regression impact and understanding how your documentation needs to change. Now, finally, just on this one last piece, I actually think that logs can be used in two different types of modes. There's a learning mode and there's a monitoring mode. And these two really sit in different environments. Let's talk about monitoring mode. This is in production itself. So in production, we've talked about using production logs against your specification to detect change. If you detect an issue where the two things don't marry up, then that should go to some sort of review process. That review process can then be used to either capture that information to enrich your spec and push it back into your detection mode, or it can be used to correct your spec. That's the bad outcome that you don't really want to follow, where you've found something that's wrong. Correct your spec, push it back into your other piece. So that's the monitoring mode. In the learning mode, this tends to be in a UAT and QA environment. In the learning mode, what you're doing is you're building up your spec for the very first time. So you are trying to use your spec to simulate or stimulate various different actions against your API to exhaustively test it in all different permutations. You look at the output of that, you review that, and again, you go into one of two different branches. You either think that this is a false positive and you can simply ignore exactly what's going on, or you can capture that as a new capability inside of your spec. And again, keep refining the specification against the log to keep refining it, getting it better and better and better. So I've covered a lot of ground there. Hopefully this has opened your eyes to different possibilities that you can do with your logs. They really are a goldmine as long as you use them properly. Thanks for joining us on Do Fix Differently. Tune in again next time.